guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to knit a houndstooth pattern. Now the houndstooth pattern is generally going to be showing up in tweed fabrics instead of like a knitted fabric, just because with tweed the yarn fibers are woven instead of knitted, so it creates this kind of jagged checkerboard shape. Most men's and women's tweed suits will have some form of the houndstooth pattern showing up. It's usually so small that you can barely see it, and it's going to blend in with the rest of like the overall color of the suit, but it's always going to be there. And in some designs they've pushed the pattern to the extreme where they've enlarged it so it becomes the main focus. And I've always associated these kind of enlarged houndstooth patterns with super fancy old rich ladies with these beautiful kind of suits and handbags and that kind of thing. So first, here's how to actually draw the houndstooth pattern on paper to get a better understanding of it. You want to start out by drawing an even grid where the squares are as even as possible, and you can do this just in pencil. Next, you're going to take a marker and color in every other square in every other column. So you're creating this kind of checkerboard pattern, but not exactly checkerboard. Next, you want to take back up your pencil and draw a diagonal line that goes through each white space between the black squares. And I'll zoom in a little closer so you can see exactly what this means. Then you want to take your pencil again and draw another diagonal line on either side of that original diagonal line. So in each of those squares you have 3 stripes. Now is the actual fun part where we get to color in and create the actual pattern. So each of these black squares is going to be a hound or a tooth, depending on your interpretation of the pattern. To do that, you'll be coloring in the 2 top triangles and the 2 bottom legs on each of the black squares. So you take your marker and make sure that each square has a pair of ears and a pair of legs. And you'll notice that in the white space, everywhere that you've created this black pattern, the white space is recreating the same pattern. And if you were to repeat this grid throughout, I guess, forever, then this pattern would just keep going and going. And this is the kind of pattern that you'll see in houndstooth fabrics. Now, the problem with knitting is that it's never going to naturally create that houndstooth pattern, because you can only achieve that with weaving and not knitting, and just by nature of the method it's never going to create that pattern. On top of that, we're going to be knitting with 2 colors, and so that's also going to limit the size of the pattern that we can achieve. So for the pattern that I'll be following this time, I've kept the hound's teeth only 3 stitches wide at their widest point. I've experimented with widening the pattern to 4 and 5 and even 6 stitches, but the wider you go on any 2-color knitting project, the more of a messy backside you're going to have to deal with. And so I've found that keeping the houndstooth pattern small and manageable at like 3 stitches wide means that you'll have not so messy of a backside, and your yarn's not going to be as tangled, while at the same time you'll be able to retain that signature houndstooth look. Now I'm just going to show you how I've done my houndstooth pattern. I'm just going to go over 1 row of the checkerboard pattern so you can see how I'm doing it. I've got 2 colors here. I've got this very, very bright red that I think is actually too bright for the camera, and then I have a gray yarn. And whenever I'm doing 2-color knitting, I keep the 2 yarns as separate as possible from them so it doesn't get too tangled. So I have my red yarn over on the right side of me and the gray yarn over on the left side of me, so I can minimize any tangles. And I've just finished up a new row of the red and gray checkerboards here, so I'm ready to start a new row of checkerboards. And I'll put the pattern up on the screen so you can kind of see where I'm at now. Working from the right to the left, I'm going to be going 2 grays for the border, and then I'm going to knit 1 gray stitch and then 1 red stitch. And then the pattern is basically 3 gray stitches, 1 red, 3 gray, 1 red, 3 gray, 1 red, to the end of the row. So I've got 2 grays for the border. My border is just garter stitch too, so I just need to knit them. And then for the face, it's stockinette stitch, so we're going to be knitting through the whole way here. So I have one gray that I have to knit, and now red. So I'm going to bring in the red yarn. When I'm knitting with two colors, I have a Fair Isle knitting tutorial that you can check out if you kind of want some more practice on doing two-color knitting. I'm not the best at it. It's not my favorite thing to do, but usually if I have two colors, I'll keep the non-dominant color, so in this case red, I'll keep that color in my right hand and I'll just use that whenever I need to. So I'll knit the one red, and then I keep my gray color, so the color that I'm using most often, in my left hand over my left finger, because I'll be continental knitting with that. And I think I went over this with my Fair Isle knitting tutorial. If I didn't, let me know and I'll maybe redo that tutorial. So I do 3 gray stitches here, and then I just follow my little pattern. So the next stitch needs to be 1 red, and then 3 gray, 1 red, and I don't worry too much about being too tight or too loose. I just kind of keep it what feels good, I guess, when I'm switching colors. And then 1 red again, 3 gray, and then red, 3 gray, one red, and then gray to the end of the row. Here's the back side that we're going to purl, and now looking at the pattern, we're going to be reading it left to right now. And so in this section of the pattern it changes, so now the red is going to be more dominant than the gray. And I'm not as good at two-color knitting with the purl side. I haven't really worked out a convenient way to hold them with my fingers, so this side takes a little bit longer for me to do, but that's okay. So I'm going to do my first 2 gray stitches for the border, just the garter stitch, so that's always going to be knitted, and then the first stitch right off the bat is going to be red, so I need to switch to my red yarn here. Really the most important rule with two-color knitting, especially when you're doing the back side, is to always make sure that your yarn is on the back side. It's not moving over to the front. So I've got 3 red stitches now. And then I've got 1 gray. So the pattern kind of changes. The last row was 3 grays, 1 red, 3 grays, 1 red. Now we're doing 3 reds, 1 gray, 3 reds, 1 gray, 3 reds, 1 gray. And that's kind of the main pattern, really. Once you get that down, you don't need to worry about anything else. It's easy with this pattern, the Houndstooth pattern, to get confused easily, especially if you're relying on looking at what you did in previous rows. It's easy to confuse yourself and kind of mess up the pattern, because it's not quite a checkerboard. It's kind of like a weird squiggly checkerboard, especially these smaller, tighter patterns. So I've found that I have to follow a written pattern, or else I'll just confuse myself if I try to rely on figuring out the pattern for myself. So I'm just going to finish up this row and then we'll go on to the next one. Back on the front side, we are halfway through with this new set of checkerboards. I'm calling them checkerboards. I don't think that's the right term, but I'm gonna go with it. So it's a new row of red squares, basically. And now we need to do another row of 1 gray, 3 reds, 1 gray, 3 reds, 1 gray, 3 reds, all the way through, except the pattern is slightly shifted on itself. So that's what kind of creates that signature little swizzle, little squiggle that is in the Houndstooth pattern. So looking at the pattern, we're reading right to left now since we're on the front, and I'm going to start out right away with my 2 garter stitches for the border. And now it is jumping right into the red. So I'm going to grab my red yarn here and do 1 stitch of the red. Just kidding, 3 stitches of the red. 1, 2, and 3. And then 1 gray. And then 3 stitches of the red. So actually, now that the red is the dominant yarn here, I'm actually going to switch how I'm holding this. I'm going to have my red yarn in my left and gray in the right, just so it goes faster now. So 3 stitches of red, 1 stitch of gray, red, 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 and gray. See, I'm someone that is easily panicked when they're looking at the previous row, because I can't help but look at my previous row as I'm knitting this new row on top of it, and I always think, like, how is this making, I feel like I'm doing something terribly wrong in this pattern. That's always going through my mind. And so especially for Houndstooth, I always just have to look at my written visual pattern, so I just follow that no matter what, because otherwise I'll make a terrible mistake because I cannot trust myself. So that row is finished and it looks about right. It's doing the little squiggle, so we've got a set of 3 over here, we've got a set of 3 that's moving slightly 1 stitch over. And now I'm going to turn it over and do another row of the purls. So reading this row now, we're reading the pattern left to right again, and in this one we've switched over. So now the gray is the more dominant color, and we're just doing 3 grays, 1 red, 3 grays, 1 red, 3 grays, 1 red, all the way through. So I'm going to finish that one up, and then we will have finished a new row of red checkerboards. So I'm going to go right into my border here. And the pattern calls for just 1 purl stitch of gray, and then we go right into red. So I'm going to bring it back to the front, pick up the red, cross it over, do 1 purl of the red, and now 3 purls of the gray, one stitch of the red, and then 3 purls of the gray. So I'm going to continue this through the remainder of the row, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. So now I've just finished up that row. It's taken maybe 10 minutes or so. I could probably go faster if I wasn't having to record a video for this. So it doesn't take that long to do 2-color knitting. I'm kind of saying that to myself so I can encourage myself to keep going with this project, because I actually like this kind of scarf that I'm making. So I think I might actually finish this. But as you can see, it's put another set of red squares on the top. And they're not quite squares, they're kind of forming this checkerboard houndstooth pattern. And I like this tight, kind of smaller pattern because, as I said before, it doesn't, the backside is pretty manageable. The kind of crisscrossing loops here are not quite as awful as they would be if it was a wider 2-color pattern. So hopefully this video has been helpful and maybe inspiring for your own kind of ideas of a pattern that you'd like to make for the houndstooth pattern. Like I said before, I've experimented with making the checkerboards wider and smaller depending on like the type of yarn I'm using and the type of project I'm doing. If you have done a houndstooth project before and it's turned out different looking than mine, or better looking even, let me know in the comments below and I'll definitely check it out, because I am kind of in a houndstooth phase at the moment and I am kind of drawn to the pattern for whatever reason, and for me the small version has really stuck with me, but I would love to try a larger version. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and always make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.